This is Remember When with Ian Blackley for Harvey Deegan.
Yes, good evening. If you'd like to hear something you haven't heard for ages, 1333 882, let us know. Or you can text on 0487 999 882 because it is Remember When. Maybe you remember something from the 60s, 70s, 80s. If you haven't heard for ages, let us know and I'll see if I can get it on for you. It is 25 to 9 and on the line I've got Matthew Pavlinovich, the Chairperson of Midland and Districts Historical Society. Hello, Matthew. How are you?
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, listeners.
Mate, tell me about this. I've got this information here. It says it's time to recognise Wexcombe. What is Wexcombe? Now, fill us in with this story because there's obviously a petition.
The petition is finished, and we're still looking to actually recognise the former suburb. So Wexcombe was originally dates back to Swan River Colony.
Right.
It was part of a 2,500 acres of land that was originally allocated to Dr. Waterman Pavlinovich in 1832. Now, we believe that the Wexcombe name comes from Wexcombe in Wiltshire in England, where the Pavlinovich family originates from. So during World War II, basically Wexcombe is now the suburb of Stratton.
Oh, okay. I was just about to ask what's it called now because they have changed names of suburbs over the years, haven't they?
That's correct. That's correct. So the original Wexcombe during World War II, the military established an army training camp at Wexcombe, and that was in the northeastern end. Now that area before when the army came, it was just predominantly bushland. They turned it into a camp, and also there was a rifle range there. So from our research, we understand that the only permanent buildings at the site were the main buildings, and while the soldiers had to camp in tents. After World War II, in the late 1940s and early 1950s, the West Australian government put a call out to Europe for skilled workers. Now, it was to cover the shortages being experienced after World War II at the WAGR workshops in Midland.
Yeah.
So the railway workshops. So they needed a place to obviously house all these migrants and all these workers and their families. So where the World War II camp was, they created the Wexcombe migrant camp. Now, the migrant camp was basically it was Nissen huts. So if your listeners or yourself know what a Nissen hut is, it's basically corrugated iron bent home.
Looks a bit like a caravan.
Yeah, a little bit like a caravan, but probably more like a tank.
Yeah.
Like a tank house, pretty much. On its side.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's how the suburb was born with that. And in 1951, the first arrivals came on ships from Europe. They arrived in Fremantle, and most of them, when they first came, they stayed at because there was also a migrant camp at Point Walter. So they stayed there just for a few weeks. And after that, they were sent out to Wexcombe. Now, back then, it was out in the middle of nowhere. It was still pretty much classed as country. And obviously the conditions that they had to put up with in terms of the weather, in terms of it being cold and obviously in the summertime. So they arrived and the Nissen huts weren't ready to live in. So they actually all the migrants from Europe at that stage, they all had to pitch tents and live in tents until the first Nissen huts were actually completed. So the migrants came from different countries, predominantly the UK. Now, most of them resided there for an average of 3 to 4 years. While usually it was the husband that was working at the workshops, and the kids and the wife were there. They eventually moved out to general suburbia, as they obviously could get enough funds from working. And obviously they made a contribution to our society and the development of this state through what they did.
Yep.
So the suburb of Wexcombe itself had a general store, post office, community hall, and it even had its own bus route to and from Midland.
Oh, okay.
Now there was also a lot of social activities that occurred within the small community. So they had a glee club. So I don't know if many of you know what glee is. I think that's a drama club.
Okay. Yep.
They even had a soccer team that competed in the WA State Soccer League, and all the children were educated at the former Middle Swan Primary School. So as the skilled migrants policy was abolished, Wexcombe become the Nissan huts remained, and it became accommodation for WAGR workshop workers and apprentices. So it provided them with cheap rent and obviously gave them a start. So that, like the migrants previously, they didn't stay there for long. They built up and they were able to go out and buy their own homes. So we believe the last residents of Wexcombe moved out in the mid-70s. The huts remained for a few years and then they were demolished. The road system remained until the establishment of the new suburb of Stratton in 1990, and was popular for people who used to go out there and learn how to drive, and car clubs used to have rallies. So the suburb of Stratton was born and Wexcombe disappeared.
Gee, it's got a good history. It's got a good history, hasn't it?
Yes, yeah. So we thought we'd lost, what was left of Wexcombe we'd lost, but in 2018 we discovered remains of Nissan huts on former streets in Wexcombe. There are some still there. Obviously there's no the main structure's not there, but there's footings there, and you can tell where bathrooms were and laundries, and so we managed to get a subdivision plan, and we've actually identified which properties they were, which huts they were, and some of the people that actually used to live there have been in contact with us, and we've managed to track them down, and so there was a section, 16 hectares of bushland in the northeast of Stratton, which was originally destined to deliver the final stages of the Stratton today. The section was unprotected, and unfortunately it was significantly degraded over 50 years. So it was basically people legally dumped rubbish there, and it was. So thankfully, 2019 Parks and Wildlife announced that they'd secured the remaining bushland and they'd incorporate it into the neighbouring A-class reserve. So it's all part of the nature reserve now. Parks and Wildlife are cleaning it up and revegetating it, and they've agreed to keep the remains there. We did a petition, an online petition. We got around 500 signatures, and Parks and Wildlife supported us, and they said they'll keep it there. They'll keep the remains there. So our plan is in the future, hopefully not in the too distant future, that we'll have some sort of interpretive signage educating people on, forgotten suburb and the migrants.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So, it's coming along, and we had 2021. We actually held a reunion for Wexcombe former residents. Some hadn't seen each other for 50 years, and that was a great turnout. And it's just before our society started any of this, there was no records of Wexcombe, and now we've managed to put a comprehensive collection of photographs that people have shared, and we can remember the place. So if it wasn't for contributors like the late Joanna Ripp, Peter Ripp, Catherine Ritchie and Marilyn Chaplin, they've been major contributors. They've shared photographs, they've even done oral histories and shared their stories of living in Wexcombe. So, it's been,
that's fantastic. That's
we've
great.
just got a little bit. We've obviously just got a little bit to go to get this recognition with the interpretive signage, but we just want it to be remembered. So.
Yeah, no, that's great, mate. You and your team have done a great job, Matthew. That's terrific. Good on you for that.
Thanks. No worries. Thank you very much.
It's always great to actually, hang on to history and, inform people that don't know about the history of that area who happen to, live there or whatever. It's fantastic. Yeah.
That's correct. And, there isn't, unfortunately, there isn't too many people in Stratton, residents that live there now, that would actually know.
No, they wouldn't have a clue.
Before.
No, they wouldn't have a clue, would they? Bottom of 2J Hill there. Okay, Matthew Pavlinovich, Chairperson of the Midland and Districts Historical Society, Wexcombe. And I'd never ever heard of it either. So, I think it's certainly informed me a bit. And so well done with all your petition. And hopefully they'll give you what you're asking for. And you're not really asking for an awful lot. You're basically just asking for it to be recognised in history, which is fine.
That's it.
Good on you, Matthew.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Our pleasure. 882 6PR.